Everyone, eat up. Don't worry, I'm going to be talking a lot at the beginning. So only one of you will have to read at the beginning. And we already have our volunteer, even though she's eating, to do that. So we don't have to worry.
No problem.
So we're gonna focus now on in depth on the shrew story on Yalta, and then you should make sure you change the dates, because the dates for the winter and spring have changed. We're now doing one session each month: January, February, March, and April. So the other dates were not possible any longer. So just make sure, if you're interested in the class, that you check the bulletin. It has the new dates.
The January bulletin, not the December.
The one that just came out this week had it.
Yeah.
We saw something.
The glass.
Right.
The English.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do the bracha. Some of you did it this morning, but it's never too many times to do the bracha. You're going to do 100 blessings a day. This will be your second for some of you. Maybe you've done others. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So the way I want to do it today, we're going to read again the story of Yalta, just as it is in that section we looked at, just to refresh for ourselves what the story is. We're going to take a few minutes to kind of reflect on it and discuss it. And then we're going to look at the image of the shrew in history and try to understand what that image is and how it's evolved. And then we're going to come back and read this the way Gila Fine reads it, right? The way she understands it. And try to see her approach toward reading Talmud, and particularly reading women in the Talmud. And again, to remind you, there are only 6 named women in the Talmud. Only 6 named women in the Talmud. The women that are named for specific, because they matter to the rabbis for a certain halacha that they're dealing with. And so we're going to look at this as our first, but then we'll look at the other women in the other sessions. And we'll see them, how Gila Fine has kind of brought them back from their time and given them the power and importance that they held in their time, and not the way they've been read since. So, Jeff, if you would please bring up the text.
Is this being recorded? Is there a
Oh,
copy?
yes, please record. A couple of people have asked. Okay, if you could make that maybe a little bigger, are you able to do that? There's
It's different with this.
That's on the other side.
there you go. Okay. Yeah, we're doing the last page on the yeah. Okay. Shall we?
I can read it.
Yes, I do.
And he fixes his eyes upon the cup so that his attention will not be distracted from it. And he sends it as a gift to members of his household, so that his wife will be blessed.
Okay. You know, dealing with a Kiddush cup, we're dealing with wine. Cup, right? Ostensibly, he focuses, kavanah, right? Intent on what he's about to do. Eyes on the cup. His attention is not distracted from it. And now he sends it out after the blessing that his wife should be blessed. Blessed, right? Okay, next.
The Gemara relates, Ula happened to come to the house of Rav Nachman. He ate bread, recited grace after meals, and gave the cup of blessing to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said to him, Master, please send the cup of blessing to Yalta and her wife. Ula responded to him, there is no need, as Rabbi Yonahan said as follows, the fruit of a woman's body is blessed only from the fruit of a man's body, as it is stated. And he will love you and bless you and make you numerous, and he will bless the fruit of your body. The Gemara infers, he will bless the fruit of your body, was not stated.
Her body.
Her body was not stated. Rather, he will bless the fruit of your masculine singular body. For his wife to be blessed with children, it is sufficient to give the cup to Rabbi. That opinion was also taught in a Baraita. Rabbi Nathan says, from where is it derived that the fruit of a woman's body is only blessed from the fruit of a man's body? As it is stated, and he will bless the fruit of your body, he will bless the fruit of her body, was not stated. Rather, he will bless the fruit of your body.
Okay, you understand? They're making literally it says in the text in Hebrew, your body masculine singular, right? Which means, the way this halacha takes it, he will bless her, she will carry a baby through because of you, right? God will bless you, male, and she will benefit, she'll have the baby because God has blessed you. So the blessing of the cup and the blessing of the fruit of the body will go through the male and not the female, right? The female carries the baby, but it's his blessing.
But it's automatically assumed that if she doesn't have children, that it's her fault, right?
Right.
Well, that is a different halacha, and it's actually, it's not, we don't know that it's assumed. We do know that the halacha says after 10 years of marriage, assuming you're having sexual intercourse during those 10 years, if she does not become pregnant, you can take another wife. That's a solution, but it doesn't necessarily, we assume that's a critique of her. It is not necessarily a critique of her because he's the one responsible for procreation according to halakha. The male is responsible to multiply, not the female. The mitzvah is his, not hers, meaning he needs to accomplish it. She doesn't. So if he hasn't accomplished it with this wife, it's not necessarily her fault, but he has to keep trying. So he has to take another wife and try with her. Now, it may be proved.
Taking another wife, it implies that it's the first wife's fault, right?
Well, we can read it that way. There, you can also read it that they were looking for a solution for him to fulfill the mitzvah. Now, he may never fulfill. Remember, nobody fulfills all the mitzvah. There are mitzvahs that, like, let's take the mitzvah of aliyah. Most of us in this room will never fulfill that, right? We're just not going to fulfill it. Most of us will never fulfill the mitzvah of letting the corners of our fields lie fallow. It's a mitzvah to do it, but we're not going to fulfill it, right? There are a lot of mitzvot we can't fulfill. A woman, according to halakha, when I say halakha, I'm talking about Orthodox traditional halakha law. A woman can't fulfill the mitzvah of vu because it's not her mitzvah. Whereas a man can fulfill the mitzvah of lighting the Shabbat candles, and a woman can because that is not gender specific. And a female has gender specific mitzvot that a male can. And a Kohen has mitzvot that a non-Kohen, right? So this case, they're saying the male's mitzvah is pru'urvu, is being fruitful and multiplying. And so the solution when he can't have a baby with his wife is to get another wife and try again. Now, well, that would be, depending, if he divorces her, she could marry someone else and have babies with that other person. But the babies are his mitzvah, the second husband. Or if she doesn't want to be divorced, and he doesn't want to divorce her because he loves her, we had that case with Hannah, right? That's the case of Hannah. Elkanah loved Hannah. And the other wife was having the babies. Right? We have it with Rachel, right? Yaakov loves Rachel, but he's having babies with Leah. He doesn't want to divorce Rachel, and Rachel apparently doesn't want to be divorced. So he's stuck with this process. So then they go through all kinds of things where Rachel gives her handmaiden to Jacob and says, have the baby through her. Maybe that's kind of like my baby. So he does. The handmaiden has the baby. Then Leah says, well, if you're taking her handmaiden, take my handmaiden. And then he has babies with that one. So obviously Jacob doesn't have a problem. It's Rachel. And then God, according to the text, opens up her womb. And then she has a baby. But obviously she has some issues with childbearing because she dies in childbirthing the second baby. So obviously there's something internally that is harmful to Rachel, that she has difficulty conceiving and she has difficulty bearing. And in those days, they had no medical way of dealing with that, so she died in childbirth. But again, coming back to this, they're taking the halacha to mean we don't need to give the cup of blessing. We bless the cup. We don't need to give the cup of blessing to Yalta because she's blessed through her husband. So if he takes the cup, she's getting the blessing because he's the one that is responsible for the baby, for fruitful and multiple. Okay? And they take that from the literal words in Hebrew, and they use the way the Hebrew is written with masculine singular. It could have said her body. Then it would have been her mitzvah. Right? That's how they take it. Okay, you want to finish?
Yeah. The Gemara relates that meanwhile, Yalta heard Ulah's refusal to send her the cup of blessing. Yalta was the daughter of the exilarch and was accustomed to being treated with deference. So she arose in a rage, entered the wine storage, and broke 400 barrels of wine. Afterwards, Rav Nachman said to Ulah, let the master send another cup. Ulah sent Yalta a different cup with a message saying that all the wine in this barrel is wine of blessing. Although you did not drink from the cup of blessing itself, you may at least drink from the barrel from which the cup of blessing was poured. She sent him a stinging response. From itinerant peddlers, Ulah traveled regularly from Eretz Israel to Babylonia and back. Come meaningless words, and from rags come lice.
So she's insults him. She has this insult, but the insult will mean something. We don't see it right now, but we're going to look at that and we'll see what the insult means. So while you're eating, I want to talk a little now about the whole issue of the shrew in literature. Probably the most famous literary shrew is the one that was named a shrew in the title, right? The Taming of the, right? Right there, Shakespeare took the model of the shrew, and Catherine, in that story, is the shrew. Classic, traditional kind of a person, woman, always a woman, who is the shrew. What do we know about Kate? Any of you who know that play? Taming the Shrew, what do we know about her?
She says that she will never marry, she'll never love a man, and she is very furious about it. She's not gentle about it, she's insistent, and she has an angry personality, sort of.
Quarrelsome, hostile. Yep. What else do we know about Kate?
She's beautiful.
Well, right.
She doesn't want to be somebody's property.
No, right. She does not want to be beholden to a man, right? But clearly in her society, she knows she doesn't have that choice. Father wants her to marry, he's going to marry. That's that world that she lived in. So what else do we know about Kate? What about her language?
She doesn't hold back.
Doesn't hold back. Sharp tongue, right? She's very sharp-tongued. She's witty, but she uses it in a very hostile, sharp-tongued way, right? She's verbally abusive. She is resistant to male authority. She's resisting her father. And he is the authority in that world for her, right? Now, let's think for a minute, if we can, of another character who has those characteristics. I wanted to think through characteristics like that, but is a more modern character and who actually has much more redeeming qualities, even though she has the qualities of a shrew. And the character that came to mind was Gone with the Wind.
Scarlet.
Scarlett O'Hara. So Scarlett O'Hara has a lot of those characteristics of, she's much softer when she wants to be, but she's also incredibly tough and resistant to males, and her approach toward Brett, very hostile, very fighting. She has a lot of those characters. On the other hand, we also see her courage and her resilience. And that's what happened to the character of the shrew as it moved toward the modern era. So for instance, if we were to take two women in history who were seen as shrews in historical terms, one of them might be Anne Boleyn. If you think of Henry's wife, historically, from the people of her era, she was criticized in all the same terms as we just criticized Kate from Taming of the Shrew. Look what she did. She caused Henry to sever from Rome, caused the rifts within England, was, according to his people of that time, was self-centered, was egotistical, was biting, was hostile. Another one would have been Catherine de' Medici, Catherine de' Medici was the Queen of France and the mother of 3 kings. The same critiques were of Catherine. But if you look at both of those women in modern historians' books, they see them very different, because they're now reading, because what came was of their era, they were criticized as shrews during their lifetime and after, and it's the way they were seen in history in that period. But over time, as modern history evolved, and we began looking back at the actual things they did, and what they said, and the way they acted, these women became very different and are seen in history very differently. So for instance, I took down some of the ways that historians see Anne Boleyn. One, she was incredibly well educated. She spoke at least 4 languages fluently. Remember, she was raised in, those of you know, raised in the court in France. That's where they had sent her. She was cultured. She was steeped in the Renaissance culture, and she brought that to the court when she came as well. She was incredibly intelligent. She had great ambition. We know this because she refused to be Henry's mistress. Henry, when he was married to Catherine, and took mistresses, he wanted Anne as his mistress. She refused to take to his bed unless she was his wife. She demanded that he respect her no matter what. That's why Henry began to try to divorce Catherine of Aragon, right? Because of Anne. It was her demand and her willingness to stand up to the King of England, who had absolute authority in those days. We know he will behead her, so he's pretty powerful, and he will not just behead her, he'll deal with the other women in his life and others in similar ways. So she stood up and said, no, I need my dignity. You will listen to my needs. You need to find a way. And Henry then went on this quest to get the divorce from the Pope. He couldn't get it because of political reasons, really. Because the King of Spain had much more power at that time with the Pope, was also in proximity to the Pope. His troops were in proximity closer than Henry's were. He was more of a threat, also had a lot of wealth in the process. So the Pope refuses. Now Henry is stuck. He can either give up Anne, I guess he could kill Anne, could execute her, but he was smitten. She was beautiful, she was cultured, she was French in her style, she was all these things, and she was of the right aristocratic house. He wanted her. He was the king. And so he took the next step. He shattered the relationship with Rome and he created the Church of England. This was because of Anne. So think of her not in the terms of the way she was seen historically, but what she did as a woman with limited power, right?
Can I ask you, correct I understand, she was a French, yes?
No, she was English, but she had been sent to France and was cultured in France. She was there to learn to become kind of an aristocrat.
But her first language was which?
English.
English, okay. But she fluently knows like
Fluent
French.
in French, Spanish,
French.
Italian, Latin. Yeah, she was very cultured, very educated, right? So, and we're think about women in that day and age, right? The average woman, the average man was illiterate. Even the average aristocratic woman was semi-literate at best. The average aristocratic male might be literate. It depended on the family. But literacy was not a common thing in those days, right? We're talking about the 1500s. And in England, which was removed from the cultural center of Europe, I mean, you know, it still was an outpost of Europe. So you have to think of Anne in those terms. So oh, your son is looking in. It's okay, don't worry. We're taking care of you.
He's a Russian class, yeah.
I know. She's got him set up learning too. Okay. So, we think about her, and we think about her political influence, and the way she, you know, in effect, changed the history of actually all of the world, Western world. Because of Anne, there is a thing that we now call Protestantism. Christianity, in its wider sense, was shaped by the demand that Anne made on Henry, and that he would not give up on her, and therefore took that step. That step also, ultimately her demise was for political reasons. But of course her revenge was Elizabeth I, her daughter, was the clear revenge. She held in her body the person that would become the model for what is monarchy, one of the formal models for monarchy in all of the world of monarchs.
If I'm not mistaken, I was reading something.
Speak up, please.
So basically, I heard that not only that Anne also was very aware of the corruption of the church at that time, and so she was, you know, at the time when the Medicis and different people were utilizing the papacy for their own purposes. So I think she was truly a Protestant in the sense that even though she's blamed because of sexuality, I think that her views were also that the church needed to be reformed.
It's possible. You know, corruption was the standard of that day there was no ethic about power and monarchy. It was all about manipulation, power, use of wealth, use of armies. Yes, they were corrupt, but they didn't see it as corrupt. They saw it as the culture. It was the culture of politics. It was the culture of the world they lived in. Everybody, you know, when I first went to Israel and we lived there, they would talk about bakshish, right? Bakshish. I mean, that's bribery. Bribery by, and not just Israel, the whole Middle East, you know, was about bakshish. That's the way you did business. You know, it was a standard in many parts of the world that you paid for, you know, the privilege of getting what you wanted. And I mean, we do that a little, we still have tips. We give tips for service instead of paying good wages. We, you know, so that we can feel like we are masters and mistresses who are bestowing our largesse on those who are not as well paid, but they should earn it, so we give them extra money.
Or we give 747 checks.
Yes, we do. We give all kinds of things, but I'm saying it was the way of the world. So I don't know that she would have seen the church as any more corrupt than anyone else. I mean, it took a while longer, you know, for Martin Luther to actually start talking about the actual bribing, publicly bribing the church in order to give, you know, freedom of wealthy boys not to have to go to the army, and they took poor boys in there because you could pay for that. But even that didn't end it. It was just a process. So I don't know that I would give her that kind of credit, because I don't think that was what Henry was doing or anyone was doing at that time. They were looking at power structures. And Henry was convinced that he could get a lot of land and power from the church by splitting and taking church property, which is what they did. They took all those monasteries and all those Catholic churches and started slaughtering Catholics, right? And then in the wars, the English war and the European wars of religion, that's what was going back and forth. They were taking property and money and taxes, right? That was the world that they lived in. But I'm saying Anne Boleyn was seen as a shrew because that model existed, and she was easily fit into that, like Catherine was. Catherine in Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew is just a very strong woman. You see it, she's a woman who wants dignity and rights, even within her world, just like Anne did. And she's very articulate, very cultured, very knowledgeable. Her puns are as good, they're Shakespearean. They're as good as Petruchio's or anybody else's. She fights physically with him, right? I mean, she engages, you know, with him. So in that period, she's called a shrew because of that model. And Yalta is seen in those terms because of the action we just saw her take. She's acting like a shrew. She's angry, lashes out, and then spits out this angry curse at the end. So she fits that mold of the shrew that men had. It's a male model for women. So why did males come up with that model for women? Why that model?
If I dare speak from sort of a feminist
And the
position,
male is speaking.
if I dare, not trying to mansplain, as they say, there were expectations of a woman's role. We're talking about not so much the uneducated, but women who might have a little education or might have a little position, but they were expected to fit into their role and not make waves, I think, that's my understanding. So you needed to characterize people who didn't fit into that role so that you could then, if not ostracize them, you could at least criticize them, and all the other men in the drawing room would say, ah, yes, she's one of those shrews, and dismiss her rather than taking her seriously. And
Okay.
that's what's happening here.
Yeah, Joni?
They were seen, I think, as a threat, just like today, women in politics. I mean, Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, all of them are depicted, that's what they're shrews, and that the qualities that they possess, if you put them on men, men admire those qualities in other men, but see it as a threat when it comes from a woman,
Okay,
and call them shrews.
but what did it serve for the time? Why did they want to put women in this? And I want to show you something you may not have seen, or maybe you forgot. This is, I'm going to share this, okay, Jeff, go for it. Is it sharing? Yes, there, get that there.
Hey, Julie.
That's a scold. That's called a scold in the Middle Ages. You see the woman? You can see on the right that it's metallic. It has a spike where the mouth is.
Wow.
It doesn't go all the way in, it just reminds her not to bite her tongue. Bite your tongue. And that was a punishment for women who spoke out of turn. It's called the scold's bridle. Yeah, S-C-O-L-D is scold's bridle. It's the Middle Ages. It's medieval. And that was those.
Came out of? We know what country this came out of?
It's all of Europe. These are all European. And you can see by the dress, those are European dress in the Middle Ages. Yeah, I mean, how often it was used? Yeah, it ties the face back, ties the mouth back, and it's a way of showing everyone this is a scold. This is a shrew. And that's why she's being punished. It's visible, right? It's not just for her in the house. She wears it and they go out, right? So this was a way of controlling, one of the ways of controlling women. All of the 6 stereotypes we're going to look at, if we get to all 6, were created by men in order to keep women in the place that met their needs, met our needs at that time. I have to include, I'm a man. I can't exclude myself from that. But that was how we men saw the world, that in order to make the world work the way we wanted it to work, we had to control women, children, and others, people that were not of us, right? Could be racial, though they didn't think in racial terms, could be ethnic, could be religious, whatever it was, we needed to have forms that controlled all of that. And one of the ways you do that is by having these stereotypes that are so negative that the society buys them. And what Joni just said is, yes, we still buy it. We still, if we ask ourselves, let's take, some of us might be Democrats and some might be Republicans in this room, but if we were Democrats, how do we see some of the women who are serving in today's administration? What is the negativity that comes up when they speak? Is it different from when the men speak in that? I'm just saying, I think once you've permeated a society with stereotypes, it's not easy to change or expel those stereotypes.
We have Golda here.
Yes, but Golda is seen very differently, and we may get to Golda with one of the other stereotypes. She was never seen as a shrew at all. But she had a kind of a different role. And as Ben Gurion called her, she's the best man in my cabinet.
Yeah.
That's what Ben Gurion said, right? Which is another way of demeaning her as a woman and saying, yes, she's really not a woman. she's a man, even though she was a mother and clearly a woman in her role. She had a kitchen cabinet. They met in the kitchen and she cooked just like Margaret Thatcher did. It was modeled after, and think of how Margaret Thatcher was seen. How some of us might still see her, right? Because she was a strong, opinionated woman who could use her language in ways that offended people. So she fit the mold.
She
Right.
was told to have voice lessons to lower her voice.
Yeah, for authority. So that men would respect her because she lived in a world where she was the only man on the cabinet. Or she was the woman on the cabinet, obviously. She was the prime minister, but she was the head of the cabinet. And lowering her voice was a way of learning how to project authority in a male-oriented thing. Yes?
Can I ask you, what age it was like? I mean, at what age she was at that time when she was like such educated, like?
Anne Boleyn,
Yeah.
how old was she? She was a young woman. She was in her late teens, early 20s.
18?
But in that world, remember, the average life expectancy was no more than 30. And even among and she didn't make it to that because of politics. Think about Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I lived until she was in her late 70s, 80, something like that. So the average age was 30 because, one, women died in childbirth. Massive amount of women died in childbirth. Two, there were diseases they had no cures for, right? There were no medicines that would cure them. There were plagues that existed, right? There was extreme poverty. People starved to death. People died of poisons that they did, that were in the foods of all kinds of reasons. So the average woman and the average man lived to 30 because some people did live like Elizabeth, long lives. Henry lived a relatively long life, though Henry died of all kinds of, they said, venereal disease. We don't know exactly, but yes, that certainly seemed to be part of it. And they had no cures for it. They didn't have penicillin. They didn't have antibiotics. All the stuff we've got to have the average life expectancy. We don't expect women to die in childbirth in our world. Yes, there is a world out there where they do, but there are far less of them today than there were 10 years ago. And if we're talking about hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, there were just masses and children. Babies died. That was the most common thing. Most of us have memories in our family history of families that were 12 children where 5 or 6 of them died, according to the stories we heard from our grandparents or our great-grandparents, or even some of us, maybe our parents' families, right? So when you think of her, she had to be educated young. If they were going to educate, they educated very young. When someone sent a child to go to sea to be, to learn to be a cabin boy, these were kids. These were 9 and 10-year-olds that were sent out because that would give them a profession, or they would make them go apprentice with a carpenter when they were young people, young boys, young girls. Seamstresses. The idea that there are people girls in China that were sewing the Nike tennis shoes, little kids. Well, that was the history of the world. Little fingers to do little work. They have to make money for the family because the family's going to starve if not everybody works.
But in Europe, that was even in the 20th century.
Yeah,
I mean,
in
not
America.
just in Asia, but really
Yes.
in European countries,
Oh, yeah.
kids were apprenticed very, very
And in Asian countries, African countries, even
Yeah.
this.
At 3, I started Hebrew school.
That's
And
right.
I learned this trade.
That's right. The trade was very important. If you weren't going to be, anything else, you were probably going to have a trade because that's how you made a living. Okay, so let's go back now to Yalta. If we could read the first part. Yes. And we have time? Yeah, let's get, I'm going to go to, what I'm looking for, Jeff, is the right-hand side and down Okay,
What act?
Act 1. You know, she does this, remember, things for her are in terms of theater, movies, literature. That's why I've been focusing as well on literature, because it's the way Gila Fine was educated and the way she sees the stories. So we're gonna look at the cup from her eyes. So we're gonna read what she has here. Act 1, the cup denied. I'll read the intro and then we'll get historical context. As the curtain rises, we find Rav Nachman and Ula together at the table, having eaten and drunk and said grace after meals. Rav Nachman, wishing to honor his wife, asked that she be sent the cup of blessing, as is the local custom. Ula demurs, quoting Rabbi Yochanan's opinion by which a woman receives the blessing of childbirth, not independently but through her husband. This is not, as some feminist leaders maintain, a sexist argument for the exclusion of women from the cup of blessing. This, according to the ancient view of reproduction, is a basic biological fact. That's how they understood biology. All right, who would like to read the historical context?
For much of the ancient world, the power of procreation belonged exclusively to man. It was man who produced life through the generative force of his seed, whereas woman merely carried that life inside her. She who is called the mother is not her offspring's parent, but nurse to the newly sown embryo, declared the Greek tragedian Aeschylus. The male who mounts begets, the female, a stranger, guards. Writing a century later and rather more scientifically, Aristotle explained that the source of reproduction was a man's active seed, passively incubated within the woman's womb. The womb itself was likened by Greco-Roman biologists to a jar lying upside down inside a woman's body, hollow, waiting to be filled.
Okay, now I just want to point out to you, we who are educated probably studied with great reverence Aristotle and Aeschylus. These are names that were taught to us in college and in high school. They're the ones who shaped that world, and this was their view, and that was the prevailing world. And remember, the rabbis of the Talmud knew of Greek and Roman thought. That influenced them, as did also the thoughts of Babylonian. But this was the nature of the world they lived in. So when we're reading the Talmud, we have to read it understanding what their world was and the view, what their background was, and how Yalta is acting within that world. Right? The woman is acting within that world. Okay, let's go on. Candace, please.
Such theories influenced the rabbinic understanding of women's anatomy. The Talmud says that man fashions woman into a vessel through the act of intercourse. Elsewhere, the rabbis describe a woman as having more storeroom than the man, a womb, wider at the bottom and narrower at the top, so that it could receive embryos. For the rabbis, like the classical biologists, the woman's body was little more than an inverted jar, a receptacle to hold man's seed. Hence, Ula's insistence on the futility of sending Yalta the cup. He will bless the fruit of your body. It does not say the fruit of her body, but the fruit of your body. Man is the primary agent of childbirth, and he alone should be blessed for it. Woman is ancillary at best and will receive the blessing when she receives man's seed into the vessel of her womb.
So women, how do you feel about this?
I love the
pressure on.
Written by a man.
Written by all men. It's all men. Talmud is written by men.
But Rabbi, when you study biology, and I'm talking by experience going to college, when I study biology, the way they see it is totally, it can be true, because there are no history, there are no records in history of the humanity that women can actually have children without the sperm.
Of course.
So, I actually see like it's a blessing to have a man who is going to actually bring that to us, so we can actually have a baby. So we both need each other.
Okay.
Each other, beautiful.
Yes, needing each other, however, they're seeing it differently. What they're seeing is that the male is the agent and the woman really is the receptacle. And her job after the baby is born is to take care, guard the baby. But it's his baby.
They had no idea about the egg.
They knew the anatomy, they dissected bodies.
Yeah.
They knew the anatomy, but they didn't know the functions exactly. They had no way of being able to replicate, the actual process of reproduction. So they were guessing. I mean, look, that's why I have to tell you, science, we should remind ourselves, up until the late Middle Ages, believed there were 4 major elements in the world and everything was created out of those 4 major elements, right? Wind, earth, fire, and air. No, wind, earth, fire, and water. Wind, earth, fire, and water, that's Aristotelian science. And up until the late Middle Ages, that was science. That's why they tried to change lead into gold, right? I'm just saying, we forget how much that world was steeped in that science. This was science. This was not superstition. This was science. This is what they studied at university.
How do we get from the biblical basis that all children belong to the man, and it doesn't matter who the woman is, to our current concept that only if the mother is Jewish is it a Jewish child? That's gotta be something.
That's halacha. It's still, so the halacha is being fruitful and multiplying means the male is responsible to produce at least minimum a male and female progeny, or it's allowed 2 male progeny. That fulfills the mitzvah. The woman does not fulfill the mitzvah of plural, only the male can fulfill that. The issue of who is Jewish had to do with when we lost sovereignty. Once you're no longer in control and can protect your women, they are now subject to the invasions and power of everybody else. You can't know who is the father, because rape was a normative part of the world they lived in. Normative. I mean, we think it's exceptional, and thank God it's still somewhat exceptional, but it was normative. Rape would happen constantly. So how do you know who's the father? So the rabbis made the decision, and that's how it moved from the notion of the father as determinant, and that was in the Bible, right? That's why we went to patrilineality in the Reform movement, because we said, we have DNA now. We don't live in that world. We know and we can test. And therefore, if we wanted to test, we can find out who the father and the mother are. So we said, in the Reform movement, patrilineality and matrilineality are equal, which means if either the father or the mother is Jewish, then that child can be Jewish if they are raised Jewishly and identify as Jews. If they are not raised as Jews and do not identify as Jews, the Reform movement says they're not Jews until they identify and know what that means. And therefore we've had people born of a Jewish father, non-Jewish mother, who eventually want to come into the Jewish community. They've been raised Christian or raised with nothing. They convert. They don't have to in Reform, but to fulfill their own sense of identity,
But if you're
they'll go
born
through it.
to a Jewish mother, you don't have to.
Well, according to halacha, that still is the standard.
It's
Or
so,
halacha, and in Israel,
no matter
is still the
no
standard.
matter how you raise the child.
Right. And that was the case, I mean, we're now getting
Even
into
in
cases.
Reform.
Yes, well, most Reform synagogues would accept if there's a Jewish mother. Well, if a child came here and was identified as Catholic, and was born of a Jewish mother, probably, I know, the rabbis would work with that child to get some understanding of a Jewish identity. If the child doesn't have a Jewish identity, they would not do the bar bat mitzvah. There'd be no reason for it. Okay,
All right,
let's,
Mr.
yeah,
This mentality of the man as the primary agent of childbirth, could that be used to have men accept responsibility for their offspring?
yeah, they're supposed to.
I think that.
In Jewish terms, they're supposed to. The male is responsible to take care of, raise, support the child, and not only that, but there are specifics. You have to teach the child to read, write, right? You have to teach them to swim, defend themselves, right? Swimming was defending themselves. Because we, in our world in Europe, we were forced to live by the rivers, which was the poor area of town, because it flooded. That's where the ghetto is, in Rome. I mean, in Venice. I think it's in Venice, the original ghetto, right? It's near the river. It's where the foundries were. It's where all the, the activity was, because it was the area that no one wanted to live. It's where the sewage was. That's where all the sewage flowed, right? So because we lived there, you had to teach a kid to swim, because when the marauding hordes came from the land, you needed a way to escape. And one way to escape, if you couldn't get in a boat, was to swim. So the idea of teaching a child to swim is really to teach them self-defense.
So the idea of making the male the primary agent is also having
Logically, it
him
means
accept
the
responsibility.
male
for
is
us.
financially
Not blaming
responsible
the
to
woman.
raise the child.
Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't mean they always do it. Okay, let's read Act 2. Who would like to read? Act 2, would someone want to read?
I'll read it.
Okay, please.
Hearing the reason for denying her the cup, Yalta gets up, goes to the wine store, and breaks 400 jars of wine. Now, I'd like to claim. Not, I'd like to claim, in a fit of rage, but as a very clever, very sophisticated response to Ulla's biological argument. Vessels are unimportant, are they? She asks as she sends jar after jar crashing to the ground. All right, let's see how you do without them. I'm not going to touch the wine, I'm just going to deconstruct the vessels. If vessels are so unimportant, it shouldn't make any difference now, should it?
So we now
Really?
we think, oh, wow, that's very clever of Yalta, isn't it? She's not necessarily flailing away. She's showing how important vessels are in the process of what he values, which is wine. He's a merchant. Ostensibly a wine merchant, he's got 400, right, barrels of wine. So look what happens when we take the vessel away from your wine. What good is it?
Isn't that her home though? Isn't this other guy visiting her at her home?
Well, but he maybe brought where's his stuff? Maybe it's being housed there. Or maybe they're working together. Maybe he, her husband and he work together. However it is, she's making a point. She's not necessarily being a shrew. She's actually making a visual argument that the vessel is just as important as what's in the vessel. So let's see Act 3. Mark, you want to keep reading? You got to start.
With the ground beneath them running red with wine, Ulla sends Yalta another cup, together with the message, all that wine can be counted as a blessing. The wine is all blessed. Yalta did not need to drink from that particular cup. Like Yalta's breaking of the vessels, this message too is far more complex than it seems. Had Ulla simply believed this to be the law, he would have cited it in the first time Rav Nachman asked him to send Yalta the cup. Ulla understands perfectly well what Yalta has just tried to tell him, and he responds in kind. If wine symbolizes man's seed, and the vessel, in this case the cup, represents woman's womb, Ulla's reproach to Yalta that she could have drunk from any cup is effectively doubling down. Vessels, that is wombs, are incidental and therefore interchangeable. The only important thing is what is inside the vessel, that is wine, that is man's seed. Therefore, procreation is fundamentally a male act. The story's biological subtext thus decoded, we may now understand the final line, not as a torrent of abuse, but as Yalta staking her claim to the blessing of childbirth. Gossip comes from peddlers and lice from rags. Lice, according to ancient biology, did not reproduce, but rather spontaneously generated.
Okay, so in their science, in their world, they believe that that lice did not, they spontaneously regenerated. They didn't, right? So she's saying to him, yeah, okay, so what do you like lice? You're gonna just spontaneously regenerate? She's arguing how important the vessel is by insulting him with what he knows, because he knows in that world they would know that's the nature of how they understand the reproduction of lice. That's why lice is so important here. Okay.
Take woman out of the reproductive equation, says Yalta to Ulla, and you might be able to reproduce lice. You might be able to generate gossip, but for any real act of procreation, both woman and man, vessel and seed, are necessary. Women might be vessels, but they are no less essential to the creation of life.
And the halacha of saying the blessing over wine, as we learned last time, is incumbent both on the woman and the man. The kiddush is for, if a woman says the kiddush, it's just as valid as if a man says kiddush, right? So the actual halacha of wine in the vessel, which symbolizes the fruit of the vine, but it's the fruit of the body, right? And in fact, wine is one of the ways of kind of making us merry and loosening us up so that we will procreate. It's a nice symbol for that because it also functions in a way of loosening us, our inhibitions, if we have enough of it. That the woman is just as valid in saying the blessing as the male, which basically says, yes, there is, he said, yes.
So none of our amazing, incredible, beloved sages interpreted in any of our books what occurred and what was written in the Talmud. Is that right? Until Gila interpreted it.
No, they would have understood, what Gila's argument is, the Talmudic rabbis, would have understood this story the way she understands it.
But nobody
But what happened in the Middle Ages later with the commentators who lived in a different time, hundreds of years later, with a different approach. And remember, many of them, Lynn, many of the commentaries that we have are commentaries that even come out of the birth of the scientific generation. And things were being uncovered and discovered. And therefore, their view of Yalta is as a shrew. They put her into that way of reading it. They read the surface. They didn't necessarily have the same worldview. And they're looking at her the way they looked at women.
Yeah, that was the cultural context.
Women who had scolds put on their mouths, right? So they lived in that world, and therefore they could easily say, yeah, that's who she was. She was this, we can dismiss Yalta. Gila is saying, this is the way she was understood in the Talmud. That's why her name is there. Why else would they remember her name? They got lots of women that are nameless, but they only name certain women. And her argument is the reason they name these women is because they made an argument that it was important in the Talmudic discussion. And remember, not many of them, there were no women rabbis. And there were precious few who were halachically knowledgeable. There were some, but they're going to name the ones that actually had a say, right?
Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah, it is. What she's doing is
that
bringing
just-
us back
That's why she.
to why Yalta's name is here. And it's not accidental, and it's not because she was a shrew. She's here because she mattered in the discussion.
It was significant.
Yeah.
She was
At
making
the
a
time of the
point.
And by understanding it, the way Gila helps us understand, she's showing us their world that she lived in, that she was, the same way that we can now understand Anne Boleyn, right? Differently than her peers wanted to understand her, or the people that, criticized her, wanted to understand her, and history was looking at her. Modern historians see who she was, what she did, what she accomplished. We can now look at it and say it's complicated. Yes, she might have had characteristics of the classical shrew, but they served her well. She doesn't hold her tongue, right? She doesn't just sit down and listen to the men. She enters into the argument. Well, that may make her, for some men, a shrew. But Gila's argument is, for the Talmud, it made her a woman of valor. Made her an important human being worthy of mention in the specific Talmud. And remember, there are 5 instances where her name exists in the Talmud, 5 separate times. So her name becomes really important. And we don't see her any longer as a shrew, but we see her as an equal to Ula and her husband, who were involved in this argument.
In the same way we see Gila Fine as a Talmud scholar at the top, maybe deserving of commentary around the phrases that are being discussed in the Talmud.
Maybe at some point there will, see, the whole,
Like the women, I was thinking of the
the Talmud
women.
did not have commentaries around it. The Talmud was just like any book. It was written on parchment, right? That's, ultimately it was collected, written on parchment, it was in scrolls. Eventually, when books came out, they started making books of it. Rabbis wrote notes in the columns and the sides. And then, eventually, the Vilna is really in the 18th century. They laid it out in the way that we now see it, with Rashi on one side and Tosfot on the other. And then they started adding on other editions, other commentaries and commentaries in the back, right? I have an Irish edition of it that I got when I first became a rabbi. It was a beautiful edition. It's gorgeous, big books, 20 of them, and it's special paper. I wanted that edition, and it has in the back modern commentaries from the 20th century, but they're not on the page, but they're in the back of each volume because they were considered of that standard, and that's the first step. And there may be at some point, a commentary that will have women's commentaries on it in another 100 years in an Orthodox setting. In our setting, I have to say that if you go to Sefaria today, they have just added the women's commentary produced by the CCAR. So you can find under commentaries, right? The ones that we have here in the green, it's now on Sefaria.
Wow.
So that's a beginning. Just like now, we have the works of modern commentaries. We're having the works of Midrash that women are having are on Sefaria. And that's becoming a standard library that is used by all denominations, not the Haredim. I don't know if they're going to use it because it's treif, because it's got a little bacon in it. Yeah, it's got real liberal rabbis, it's got women, it's got heretics. So they may not use it as a library. But believe me, their grandchildren are going to be referencing whatever the electronic world is that has all these texts, and is not going to be having a library of 10,000 books like I had, of all these great books. They're going to have online, and it's going to be a mixed bag because it's hard to separate. Okay. Okay, so we'll meet again in January. Have a wonderful rest of Shabbos. Have a wonderful Hanukkah.
And happy New Year.
And a good New Year. And we'll see you in 2026.
Thank you.